Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of In Pursuit of Clarity. I'm titling this episode on the importance of controlling our environmental influences. I was lucky enough to live in Paris for a few years a while back when it was still Paris. I recall a specific moment in time on one of my many random, directionless exploratory walks. I recall analyzing the shift in my mindset as if from the outside looking in, caused by a cumulative of sensory inputs. Smells from the bakery and pastry shops wafting down the alleys, the radiant smiles of children playing in the periphery, the warm sunlight on my skin, a beautiful violin echoing down the cobblestone streets from the distance. All of this and more serving to lift me up to where all seemed right with the world, if only for a moment, making me incapable of thinking anything but lofty thoughts or speaking anything but kind and magnanimous words, in the unlikely event I decided to speak anything at all. A shrill and angry tone of a woman berating someone in the distance brought me back down a bit. Catching a glance of a face locked in an angry and depressed expression pulled me down still further. Walking inside to see a TV left on with CNN or some similar nonsense accomplished the rest, and I was once again anchored firmly back to earth. We can't help but adopt the frequency of our environment to some extent, especially in an immediate sense, because everything is contagious. That happiness or anger or sadness or enthusiasm you're feeling isn't something entirely localized within your being, but rather an aura of sorts, broadcast to the world. It's in the air. Even before you utter a word, it's written in your posture, your bearing, your mannerisms, your face. And even regardless of your word choice, it's embedded within your intonation and cadence, your chosen style of delivery of said words. We all communicate to one another in countless nonverbal ways at all times, some of which are more pure and honest than our verbalized attempts. This fact should cause us to deeply consider our effect on others. But that's not what this episode is about. Instead, I'm asking you to consider others' effects on you. Those of you that have seen much of my work or have tuned into the live stream have likely seen the Aristotle quote, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Our brains are incredibly malleable and adaptable, even those of adults. Their ability to pick up everything useful from an environment and discard what isn't readily helpful or needed is truly incredible. But they're only able to pull this helpful information and context from the environments we provide. So many of us recognize that we're existing in an age filled with bad air, polluted environments, both literally and figuratively speaking, in which the signal-to-noise ratio of useful and healthy and life-affirming information and context relative to muddiness and confusion and sickly toxicity has plummeted. The world as a whole is becoming more cheap and petty, more superficial and ridiculous. Like it or not, we all breathe the same air from the same atmosphere, which means we all suffer from these macro developments to some degree. But what if we were able to find mountains here and there, the ascent of which allowed us access to crisp, clean air? And even if we weren't able to set up camp near these peaks, perhaps before we headed back down, we could fill our lungs to better survive the inevitable time in the valleys. Might this access to purer air cause us to feel healthier and more alive, more lucid and sharp over time? I've come to believe this analogy operates on two different levels. The more universal level, and that there isn't a person alive who wouldn't benefit from escaping pettiness or malevolence, or ignoble and base thoughts or words or actions. But also a more personal level, in the sense that as individuals, our paths to the top of our own mountains may be slightly different from one another. For the individual with an ear for music, it might be a transcendent work from a brilliant composer that transports you to this peak. For a philosopher, it may be losing yourself in the greatest works of our most potent minds of previous ages, and finding that resonant frequency that allows you to connect and experience their lofty genius in a personal way. For the Viking berserker, this state seemed to be attained through battle itself. For those able to see God's face reflected in the perfect balance and harmony within nature, it may be immersion in nature's beauty that acts as your mountain. And for those that have honed the practice of meditation, it might be perfect silence itself. I've come to believe the attainment of these states of being is what makes life worth living, and that one of our most important tasks is seeking to know ourselves well enough to find our own mountains, and learn to take advantage of the lofty heights they provide us. Learn to tap in and harness the energy arising from the increased perception they allow, the expansive vision. It's a vantage point that gives life meaning, instantly makes our existence seem less small, far more worthwhile, meaningful, and valuable. Our world seems to be increasingly filled with tethers and anchors aimed at keeping us from engaging in this type of ascension. And often, so many of these stumbling blocks are disguised as climbing tools, which is why the best way to navigate this environment is to pay close attention throughout the day, as you have conversations or experiences or sensory inputs of any sort, constantly asking the question, was this a net positive or a net negative? Jordan Peterson used the phrase, stop doing things that make you feel weak. And this is another valuable frame of reference. Asking, did my environment or experience just now cause me to feel an increase in power, happiness, fulfillment, or serve to lift me up? Or did it end up causing me to feel weaker, smaller, produce a feeling of weightiness or wasted energy? Maintaining this type of awareness is certainly easier said than done, so I don't say this flippantly. But if one is capable of the self-discipline throughout the day to be both cognizant of which of these two feelings is being produced by any given environment or stimulus, and then retain a memory of this as a reminder going forward, one can begin to guide themselves ever upwards towards their mountain peaks and live a better life for it. If one spent all day watching reality TV, digesting the manner of thinking and speaking and living of the type of individuals that appear on such programs, they literally couldn't help but walk away being something of a carbon copy of these confused souls over time. And this is roughly analogous to what modern society is doing to us on a meta level. We're surrounded by cheap, tacky, hollow, and soulless garbage, devoid of depth and substance. And it's turning us into human beings with these same traits. Very much like addictive drugs, these habits take a very real toll. Tolls not often discussed because those owning the platforms of discussion are the very people pushing this destructive poison. They have no incentive to cure, and every incentive to poison us further. Discovering just how much we're directly shaped by our environment caused me to make a conscious effort, even force myself initially, to discard lesser inputs and embrace greater inputs, which required first and foremost defining the term greater. Intelligence, courageousness, keen judgment, wit, and creativity. I started seeking out the best examples of individuals possessing these attributes, and reading them or listening to them almost exclusively. After years of being surrounded by Plato and Nietzsche, Dostoevsky and Goethe, Emerson and Thoreau, I can honestly say I find myself far more tolerable for it. Again, everything rubs off. Everything is contagious. That's not to say one could hope to be the equal of an Emerson after a decade or so of swimming around in the context of his creations, but it is to say that bits and pieces of his manner of thinking or speaking, his worldview or values or perspective, will become a very real part of who you are. A good way to think of this is that at any given moment, our environment is serving to pull us upward or downward. And despite what these relativistic charlatans of the modern age might tell us, these up and down, positive and negative valuations can objectively be drawn. No sane person would attempt to argue that pettiness is equivalent to inspired genius, for example, or that spite is equal to love. Adam Sandler is no peer of Aristophanes. Our Billboard 100 list can't exactly be compared to a Bach, Beethoven, or Wagner. As the products and creations we consume become more cheap, mass-produced, and one-dimensional, our character and personalities can't help but follow suit. My hope for this episode is that it might act as a little reminder. A reminder of something most of us know on some level, at least to some extent, but something easy to overlook and lose sight of. Something modern culture seems to be working hard to get us to forget or ignore. If you seek to ascend, aim to take in only those sensory inputs that give you energy, that inspire or fulfill, just as you'd seek out healthy food for a healthier body. And recognize we're completely surrounded by unhealthy temptation. That sugary snack might provide some instant gratification as it's being consumed, but in the long run you'll likely end up paying a higher price than that instant was worth. Fighting against this trend towards the devolution and domestication of mankind begins with our safeguarding ourselves against such processes. So I urge you to be awake, aware, and insofar as you're able, flee from that stagnant and polluted air of the modern marketplace, and in its stead, seek your mountain peaks. Thanks for listening.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my own